This happened to me when I was about 12 or 13 years old, so about 15 years ago, and I am a female. The town that I live in has developed a lot since this story, but when this happened there were a lot of factories spread out, with lots of land in between them. There was a Walmart being built in the area as well, but it had just barely started construction. There was a main highway that ran through there, but my mom didn't like taking it much, as traffic would get very bad most of the time. The side streets we would take were desolate, with not much light. There was also little to no cars taking these streets though. I can't remember where we were coming from that night, but in the car was my mom, my brother who was 3 years younger than me, and myself. My mom was obviously driving. I was in the passenger seat, and my brother was sitting behind me. My mom is the sweetest person ever, but is very adamant that she will never stop to help somebody on the side of the road, or pick somebody up, especially when her kids were in the car. She does, however, make sure she calls the police so that they can help. It was around 9 p.m., and we were going home when my mom and I spotted someone off to the side of the road, by the passenger side with their hood up. Nothing out of the ordinary. My mom slows down a little as it was very dark outside, and she didn't want to accidentally run anybody over that might be fixing their car. As soon as we were close to the car, the man stepped out from around the hood towards the street and began waving us down. I don't remember much of a description because I wasn't paying too much attention, plus I could barely see the man. But I do remember feeling bad we weren't at least going to stop to see what he needed. The man at this point is in the middle of the road waving his hands, but as we come up on the car, we don't see anybody else. My mom swerves around him and tells my brother to find the phone in her purse that was in the floor between the front and back seats. I look at my mom as she looks into her rear view mirror and her face goes white, her eyes get wide. My mom slams her foot down on the accelerator. This was highly unusual, as she was usually really good at going the speed limit. I immediately knew that something was wrong. My mom's voice goes high, and in a panicked voice she asks my brother where her phone is. I'm yelling at her, "What's going on?" All this chaos is freaking my brother out, and with him being so little he started crying and couldn't find the phone. My mom kept her eyes on the road, but kept glancing up continuously at her rear view mirror and finally answered, "He's following us." I'm not exactly sure what she was talking about, but I knew that this wasn't a good situation. My mom was speeding towards the highway. Thank goodness there was no traffic. I look out the back window and see somebody passing cars trying to keep up with my mom. I ask her where she's going, and she told me she's headed to the police station. As we were getting close, my mom tells me to jump out of the car as soon as she stops and grab my brother from the back seat while she runs around the car to meet us. My mom stopped right in front of the police station and didn't even wait for the car to fully come to a stop before she put it in park. I opened my car door as fast as I could and grabbed my brother who had quickly opened his as well. I took off in a full sprint with my brother in one hand and my mom on the other. Once we finally talked to a police officer is when I fully understood the extent of what had happened. My mom told the officer that once we had passed the guy with the broke-down car, he quickly ran to the hood and slammed it shut. He then hopped into his car and started taking off after us. That was when my mom knew this guy had horrible intentions. She said he kept trying to speed up to get on the side of us, but she was able to speed up to avoid that. Once my mom turned toward the police station, she said the guy had stopped following her, but still wanted to get to the police station in case he changed his mind. She gave the best description of the guy and his car, but because everything happened so fast, she didn't get a license plate number. I'm pretty sure the police never found him. I'm also not sure what the guy had planned for us, especially if we had actually stopped to help, but I know that it was nothing good. I moved a lot growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times, and was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together as well. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group readily. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating, although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I had kind of a bad home life. I'd spend as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until 6 or 7 at night with this same friend group. When 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home, since the others had already gone. I just thought he was being a gentleman. He mentioned something from a previous move when he lived in California. He didn't walk a friend home and something horrible ended up happening. He left it at that, and I allowed him to walk me home. We got a lot closer after that. We bonded over both living in California and exchanged numbers as well. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I just wanted to help. A few months later, he tried asking me out. It was a big, romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang to me in the cafeteria. I was already dating someone, though, and when I turned him down, he got angry. A freaky, quiet, twitchy kind of angry. I felt so bad. I started seeing him everywhere after that. We were still friends. We still hung out in the same groups. But I would pass him on the street walking somewhere, and a few minutes later I'd see that he'd changed directions and had started to follow me. He would walk me to my classes by following me in passing period at a distance. I started to minimize the group time we spent together, and he would follow me even more. I had friends meet me at each class to walk me to my next one because I felt unsafe. He knew where I lived as well. Then he started to talk, not to me, but to mutual friends, about that one California girl who he tried to walk home. At first, she shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes, and over weeks this fantasy evolved. They were walking home and were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, which happens to be my birthday. She died horribly and he couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who had brown curly hair, blue eyes, my name, my birthday, and sounded just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy with this sick fantasy about my death would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive, mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure at least that he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at school, or in our little town walking home from school in the dark. But one day at school he had a complete breakdown, freaked out and ran out in a panic. I was sent after him, and I found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure he was okay. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from mutual friends with added details. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife, asking for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone. I didn't have anything else on me, and he thought I was calling the cops. Stabbed me once, twice, again and again, and Sam stood there horrified. He saw red and grabbed the broken glass bottle near my body, attacked the homeless man, and killed him with his own knife. He told me that he killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was fantasy or real, and I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police, because he was scaring me. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first. That morning we went and told them everything. The stalking, the stories, how he admitted to murder and was the reason they moved from California, how I was afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. And the counselor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal, and the principal, who's not a mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusations. The principal then informed me that he did not think that Sam had any kind of mental illness, or that I was in any danger, and that was that. I lost faith in adults, gave up on going to the police. I stayed with my friend, walking me in between classes, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend, and looking behind me every step of my walk home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us, to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now. I would think it was all made up, if it weren't for my journal entries recording the events, and my growing panic. The similar stories from my friend group helped as well. Disclaimer: English is not my native language, so I probably made a few mistakes while typing this. Sorry about that in advance. I've never posted anything here, so I'm a bit new to this. The story I want to share with you happened 1 year ago, not too long after the beginning of the first semester. I was 20 by then, and I used to hang out near my university a lot at this time of year. The weather was still really nice and warm, and my university was just adjacent to a beautiful park. As we had a 3-hour break, a friend of mine asked if I wanted to eat lunch in the park rather than sit in the cafeteria. I of course said yes, and so we walked over. It was a regular school day, probably a Thursday, and the place was filled with kids, students, and people walking their dogs, so not very empty at all. It may seem a bit odd to underline this, but I rarely go by myself to a park if there's no one else around, because it makes me feel very nervous. Kind of vulnerable. I'm an overly anxious person, so don't judge me. But this day, the place was very crowded, and we barely managed to find a place somewhere on the grass for us to sit down. We ate, talked, and enjoyed the sunny weather together for a good hour. After about an hour, though, the park was way emptier than when we had arrived. Almost all of the children had left by now, and we were quite on our own. As we both wanted to smoke a joint a little before returning to classes, and now that we wouldn't bother anyone with the smoke, we went ahead and rolled 2 joints. I know it's not an especially good thing, but it was our little habit when we hung out together. Anyway, the past belongs in the past, right? I was focused on rolling up when my friend suddenly turned and asked me, "Hey, do you see them?" I looked in the same direction as her, but I couldn't see what she was talking about. She insisted, though. "Those guys with the bag, they're staring at us." And then I saw them, 50 meters away from us. 2 guys who seemed a little bit older than we were standing in the middle of the way, looking very intensely at us. They literally had no expression on their face. I'm kind of used to creepy men, whether they're polite or much more intrusive. You know, those who follow you in the streets, who inexplicably stare at you in the bus for 30 minutes, those who won't leave your side unless you give them your number. It can be really easy to get rid of them, but those encounters are often awkward, embarrassing, or even worse. I felt a little uncomfortable, but I wasn't too worried. As I kept on watching them, I understood right away that they were going to talk to us. I asked my friend if she knew them. She answered no, adding that she hoped they would not come over and say hi. Unfortunately for us, 3 minutes later they were right in front of us, smiling. There were 2 of them. The first to talk introduced himself as Manny. He was a small and short-haired guy who we could obviously tell at a glance was on drugs. I wouldn't know which ones, to be honest, though. The other one was a tall, pale, and quiet guy. I can't remember his name. Let's call him Steve to make things a bit easier. Manny talked and smiled a lot. He introduced himself and his friend, asked us about our day, praised the warm temperatures. He seemed either unable to shut up or desperately trying to play it cool with us. Before we could even tell them to leave, he invited himself to join us on the grass, assuming that we would be okay with it. As a welcoming gift, he opened his bag. It was a huge plastic one, like one you would take with you to grab some groceries, and showed us a 4.5-liter bottle of vodka. I couldn't help but judge them. It was 1 p.m. in a park in broad daylight, so that much felt ridiculous to me. His friend handed us a tiny and already used paper cup. We declined the offer, of course, saying that we needed to stay sober because we had classes to attend 2 hours later. Unfortunately, it seemed they had already drunk a fair portion of the vodka themselves, and they kept insisting until my friend finally told them, "Look, I'm not the type of person who would drink vodka right after lunch. I either drink it on Friday night with my friends or pass my turn, so don't ask us again." I should tell you now, my friend is not a scaredy cat at all. To be honest, she's the bravest person I've ever met, and she's never uncomfortable in front of strangers. Usually, when she's bothered by a weird guy, she either tries to act weirder than him to make him feel uncomfortable, or laughs it off, making jokes and acting friendly until she tells him to leave because she'd rather be alone. In the worst cases, she'll just kick his ass and leave. Even though she didn't want their company, she was still unperturbed and relaxed, way more so than I was, and it felt good to have her by my side. They must have felt that she was quite serious, because they stopped insisting, and instead they started to ask us things like, "Are you students? Do you have a boyfriend? Can I have your number?" and so on. We were both in a relationship, and not interested in the two of them, but that didn't stop them at all from flirting. They kept complimenting us in a heavy, unpleasant, and clumsy way, and we began to feel embarrassed. We could clearly tell that the alcohol was unleashing itself upon them. They were annoyingly enticing, openly flirty, and it escalated quickly from sympathetic remarks on the way we were dressed to nasty sexual advances. As I said, we were not interested, but they wouldn't take no for an answer. I was so uncomfortable that I avoided eye contact as much as I could, while trying to find a way for us to get out of this situation. At this point, 2 other men walked up out of nowhere, supposedly their friends, and came and sat with us, even though we didn't tell them that they could. They looked dirty, idle, and stoned, and one of them had a scrawny dog full of fleas as well. We kept our thoughts for ourselves. My friend tried to get them to leave with something like, "We should probably get back to college now." It didn't work the way we planned. Instead, they offered to come with us, claiming it was not the first time they had crashed classes just for fun. We said we didn't want to get into any trouble, but Manny insisted again. We kept declining. He kept insisting. Eventually, he said, "Don't worry, it's no big deal." Suddenly, he pulled a gun out of his pants and brandished it in front of us with a proud expression on his face. We immediately stopped smiling. First, because we live in France, and carrying guns is neither allowed nor usual. And second, because we now felt trapped. The gun looked old, but real, heavy and extremely dangerous in drunken hands. It was suddenly not funny anymore. I was genuinely afraid of what might happen next. One of his friends, the one with the dog who I'll call Nick, started to panic, got up and yelled, "Are you fucking crazy? Don't you know I have heroin on me?" "Chill out, there's no cops here." His friend shook his head and took his bag, ready to get out of there. Manny pretended to be aiming at Steve, and he told us with his big carnivorous smile that he could shoot him without being in trouble. Steve suddenly seemed a little nervous as well. Nick walked away, yelling that he didn't want to be seen with us because it was too risky, and I couldn't find myself disagreeing. We were in the middle of the day, in an almost empty park, so the scene seemed quite surreal. I just thought, crap, I've never been this close to a gun. The owner is drunk as well. It looked bad. He turned towards us, exhibited the weapon, and asked for our opinion. "Do you like it? Are you scared?" I tried my best to hide the fact that I was scared, because I didn't want him to notice it and take advantage of me. Even my friend kept a fake smile on her face to keep up appearances. He quickly put the gun back in his pants and stared at us for a long time with a strange look in his eye. After a while, he strangely asked, "What did you see?" I figured he was talking about the gun, but I couldn't understand why he would ask such a thing with such a suspicious tone. He asked again, so I said, "I saw nothing." He laughed. My answer may seem stupid, but I didn't want him to feel proud or give him power over us. I thought it was stupid to carry a gun and point it at his friend as well, but he simply kept laughing. His laugh sounded awful in my ears, like one of a cold-blooded sociopath. I was so nervous that my hands started shaking. My friend must have noticed it, because all of a sudden she grabbed my arm. "Oh crap, we're late. We have to go, so have a nice day." We took off running as fast as we could. They shouted after us, "Can we have your phone number at least?" We never walked so fast to get to classes than this day, even though we ended up not attending the lecture because our teacher was sick. At the time, how could we know though? We were still so astounded by what just happened that it took us several hours to process. After that, we avoided the park for a long period of time. I want to add something because it may be confusing. We had no idea who they were as well. We had never seen them before, and we didn't know what business they were in, or what kind of things they could do. We could only make assumptions, because, well, they were carrying hard drugs and Manny had a gun. But one thing was for sure, they all seemed pretty fucked up as human beings. We could have asked them why they had those things on them, but it felt a little too risky. We were two defenseless girls, and it felt safer to stay quiet about delicate subjects. We also never told the police because we had no idea what proof we were supposed to give them. So I've recently discovered this page, and thought I would share my Let's Not Meet encounter. I'm not sure if it belongs here, so just let me know if it would fit somewhere better. So I lived in a pretty nice area with my husband and some family friends. We lived there for a few years, with nothing bad ever happening around us. Overall, it was a very safe neighborhood. For context, I'm a very short white female, and I'm considered disabled, even though visually I look fine. I could never really beat anyone up since my disability limited my activity severely. Anyways, on to the story itself. This happened about a year before we moved. I had had some stories pop up on Facebook about some traffickers that were targeting women and children at a local store that we lived just behind. I was a bit freaked out, so I made it a point to not go to the store without my husband. I still got the news articles about people being followed and grabbed and kidnapped from this store, but I felt pretty safe as long as I didn't go anywhere without my husband. I was going to work one day. I worked about 15 minutes away from our house. It was a call center kind of out in the middle of nowhere. There were fields every which way around us. I worked the afternoon shift and was one of the last people to leave at night. I had to stop and get gas, and was a little freaked out because I was scared to go anywhere without my husband. I wasn't going to make it to work and back home though, so I had no choice. I stopped at the gas station and was slightly relieved that it was very busy. I got out and started pumping my gas when this big van pulled up in the spot right next to mine. A man got out and started pumping his own gas. Then he walked around the pump and got in between my car and me. He smiled at me and said, "Wow, your car is so clean. How did you get it so clean?" I was flabbergasted by the question. My car was a complete mess. It was so dirty it even had bugs still stuck on it. "Why don't you, show me how you get it so clean?" He reached out to touch me, but I jerked back. Another car pulled up behind me, and a man hopped out. I think he freaked the other guy out, because he walked back to his van. I quickly finished pumping my gas and hopped into my car, locked the doors, and sped away. A few minutes later, though, I look out my window, and the van is behind me, riding my bumper pretty much. I could see the guy smiling and laughing with some other man. I was pretty freaked out, but figured he was just going to the freeway. We passed by the freeway exit, but he keeps following me. Now I was getting freaked out. The only place on this road now is my work. I called my husband, but he didn't answer, since he was at work as well. I didn't really know what to do, so I just picked up speed and continued to work. I kept looking back, and the van was always still there, just a little farther back. I made it to work finally. It was a large building, with lots of cars in the parking lot. I parked right in front of the doors in a handicap spot and ran inside. I looked back through the locked doors and saw the man stopped in front looking pissed off. I ran up to where my department was and went right up to a friend who happened to be ex-military. He carried a gun on him at all times, and I cried as I told him what happened. After I got to work, I was still freaked out all day. We closed and I was walking down to my car. I peeked out the windows and saw the white van was still there. I couldn't see anyone in there, and to be honest, I wasn't completely sure it was the same van. I ran back to my department though, and told my friend what was going on. He pulled out his gun and walked me outside. The van had now moved right behind my car. My friend walked me to his car. We got in and he drove me right up to mine. He then followed me all the way home and sat outside until I was safely inside. I could see the van following us, but once we passed the freeway, he turned onto it. The next afternoon on my way to work, I passed by the gas station, and the van pulled out just as I did so. Again, they followed me to work, but turned away once I got to the parking lot. This went on for about a week. They would follow me to work, leave, then be outside as I was leaving, and my friend had to walk me out. My buddy told me that they were probably trying to learn my schedule so they could figure out a time to jump me. He insisted I take one of his guns just in case he wasn't there at work to walk me out. I didn't want it though. I was afraid that if I had it, then I would get pulled over for something and get in trouble for having a gun not registered in my name. I was telling my husband that evening about how this van was still following me, and he suggested that I should just call the cops and let them know. I was stunned. I honestly don't know why I didn't think of that myself. So the next morning, when I was about to get ready for work, I called. I told them everything, and then I left for work. Just like clockwork, the van pulled out of the gas station and started following me. We were on the long stretch of road that nothing was on when I spotted a car parked off to the side. I passed. The car passed as well, and then the lights came on. The van was pulled over. I later found out that the men following me had several warrants for rape and attempted kidnapping. The back of the van had knives, rope, gloves, masks, chloroform, and other sketchy crap stored within. The cops believed that I was going to be their next target. When I got back to work, my friend wasn't there. He happened to be sick that day. I'm glad I called the cops that morning, because I don't think I would have made it home if he wasn't there to walk me out. Anyway, that's my creepy story. I hope you guys liked it. We have since moved out and live in a not as nice area, but so far I haven't noticed any creepy people around. I always carry pepper spray just in case though.